meeting today. Today we'll be hearing information on the Department of Agriculture budget, and that will be might take up the whole hour, so we won't have anything else to take care of at this point. So with that, we will begin on hearing on the agency budget by the Secretary Mike Beam, Department of Agriculture. Welcome to the committee, Secretary.
Thank you. Good morning, committee. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm going to take a few minutes and highlight some of the few areas of our budget, and I think there's probably 3 documents that our staff has provided you. One's that I'm going to be working off is, I think, 2.5 pages, and I'm not going to go through it all, but you know, we're a pretty diverse organization in regards to the activities and the programs. We have 15 separate programs in 6 divisions, and they handle a lot of issues that affect farmers, ranchers, agribusinesses, consumers on a daily basis, everywhere from grain warehouse inspection to animal disease traceability, plant protection, and we employ approximately, when we have everyone on board, approximately 330 people all across the state. About half of those report to the headquarters in Manhattan, and there's another 150 that work remotely throughout the state, and also in our 5 field offices that deal with Division of Water Resources. The highlights of our budget, at the bottom of the first page, there's a chart that just breaks out the income that comes into the agency. But you'll see that the FY 22 adjusted request is $55.1 million, and the FY 23 is $54.3. Just a little under $9 million of that total is slated to come from the general fund in FY 22. There is a proposed increase to go to 1.1. An increase of $1.1 million because of the governor's budget recommendations. So again, you'll see the breakout at the bottom of the first page. I think you'll see a couple numbers stick out. The state water plan funding, that's largely passed through, but a lot of those programs are administered by our agency. Same on the fee funds, that's a pretty substantial part of our budget, our fees, various fees that we collect through the programs. And then at the top of the second page is a breakout of our expenditures, and about 47% of our expenditures are related to salary and wages, at least for FY 23. We've our fees for professional service are pretty steady from 21 to 23. A large portion of these are from federal grants. Grants, claims, and aid to local units or locals was slightly larger in FY 21 because we administered part of the Securing Local Food System grant program that put funding in for local meat processors, distributors, and specialty crop growers, food pantries, and others. Again, on water plan funds, largely going to local landowners, watershed districts, conservation districts, and others that line up with what the state water plan is, and of course, recommended by the Water Authority. And you will see that there is an increase in our rent payment for our laboratory. The lab went in. We moved into that in March of 2020. The lab was built in Manhattan. The agreement with the landowner was that the first year we would not pay rent. So obviously we now are paying rent, and that'll show up as a significant higher cost value. So the bottom half of 22 starts highlighting the governor's enhancements. There's an enhancement of about $330,000 for meat and poultry inspection. We have a program that inspects mostly the larger and some medium-sized meat processing facilities. The large facilities usually prefer to go federal inspection, and that's an option. If you have a plant, you can go state or federal, but many of the smaller ones come to us for the inspection. And I think we're looking at 7 new facilities that's come on since the pandemic, and another dozen to 20 that are seriously considering building or starting a new facility as well. So we're having difficulty, one, in keeping those inspectors, and number two, having enough to cover the existing facilities. So we had asked for an enhancement, and you'll see that that was made in the governor's recommendation. The key to know here is that even though it's a state-inspected program, half of the funding comes from the federal, from USDA. So if we put another $1 into the program from the state, then there's a $1 match from the federal agency. There's also an enhancement for 3 positions in the Division of Water Resources in the water structures area. That's $384,000. That is to fund those to try to keep up with the inspections that we're struggling with, as well as the vehicle and travel. The third bullet there, you'll see that there's a $484,000 enhancement for the animal facility inspection program. Right now that's in the Division of Animal Health. That will allow us to increase the funding level for those inspectors and staffing. It allows to hire an attorney and 2 additional employees, also help with some of the rent and travel vehicle cost. And then there, in addition, there's a $50,000 that will be committed as shelter reimbursement fund for small animals when needed. We're also supportive of the governor's recommendation to fully statutorily transfer the state for the state water plan of additional $1.6 million to the agencies, and I know Kellen Leaps, our CFO, is going to talk about that in a little more detail. But there's 3 bullets there on top of the 3rd page that also highlights additional enhancements. The soil health initiative of $104,000, aid to conservation districts, $500,000. Again, that flows through, all that goes to the conservation districts. And then a $450,000 for enhancements in our water resources cost share program. And I've included examples of what those programs entail. Again, they're cost share assistance that goes mostly through the conservation districts for those projects. So I know there's also a pretty lengthy document as a budget overview. I think Kellen's going to walk you through that. I think some pretty detailed information on a program by program. And then she's also going to talk a little bit about an ask on a technical amendment on the water plan expenditures. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I'd be happy to respond to any questions that you or the committee might have.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Secretary. Appreciate that. I want to back up here first. We need to hear from the legislative research analyst. Victoria's here. I overlooked that part. So we're going to have her give her report, and then we'll open up for questions on those. So welcome to the committee, Victoria. Sorry I missed you there.
Oh, you're fine. It's kind of nice for the agency to go first. So I will be presenting as usual from the document that looks like this, Kansas Department of Agriculture. And I'll keep it even shorter since you heard a lot from the secretary and we'll hear even more from the agency. So I will move straight to page 4. On page 4, looking at the agency estimate, the agency estimates 2022 revised expenditures of $55.1 million, including $9 million state general fund. This is an all funds increase of $5.9 million, and an SGF decrease of $20,000 from the 2022 approved amount. Part of that increase comes from item number 2, state water plan fund reappropriation. So the agency is allowed to carry over unspent state water plan fund monies. So that was $2.6 million that they didn't spend in 21 that's carried over into 22. Another significant portion of that $5.9 million increase is due to items 3 and 4, and those are federal funds for the water structures program. And I'll move straight to page 5. At the bottom of page 5, the governor did concur with the agency's revised estimate. And I'll go straight to 2023 on page 7. On page 7, the agency requests fiscal year 2023 expenditures of $54.5 million, including $10.3 million state general fund. This is an all funds decrease of $629,000, an SGF increase of $1.3 million from the 2022 revised estimate. That state general fund increase is primarily due to the agency's enhancement requests, and we'll talk about that in a couple of pages. The agency also has several state water plan fund enhancements that we'll talk about in a couple of pages and that you heard the secretary mention. And turning the page to page 8. Towards the bottom of page 8, the governor's recommendation. The governor recommends fiscal year 2023 expenditures of $54.3 million, including $10.1 million state general fund. This is an all funds decrease of about $218,000 and an SGF decrease of about $182,000 below the agency's request. And all of those decreases are due to the governor partially recommending several of their enhancements. And so we'll move on to the enhancements, which start on page 10. On page 10, that first enhancement, and as a reminder, enhancements all relate to fiscal year 2023. That animal facilities inspection program, the agency is requesting about $483,000 and 3 FTE positions to fully staff and fund resources in the animal facilities inspection program. The majority of that money is for salaries and wages for an attorney and for additional positions, as well as salary increases for current inspectors in that animal facilities inspection program. Those new inspectors will need vehicles as well as travel and communication costs, so that's the rest of that enhancement. And the governor did concur with that $483,000 state general fund enhancement. Looking at request number 2, you just heard the secretary talk about the meat and poultry program inspectors. The agency is requesting $611,000 for 6 new positions in the meat and poultry program. Again, as the secretary mentioned, that is a federal match program, so everything except the vehicle purchase would be matched with federal dollars. So only $365,000 of that is state general fund. The rest is matching federal funds. That carries over onto page 11. The governor recommends $539,000 and 3 FTE positions for filling vacant inspector positions. The governor did not recommend $72,000 for salary increases for current inspectors. So again, she recommended funding for the agency to hire new inspectors, but did not recommend funding to increase salaries for current inspectors. On request number 3, the agency is requesting $40,000 state general fund for salary increases for engineers in the dam safety program, the water appropriations program. The governor did not recommend that $40,000 for salary increases for engineers in the water appropriations program. Request number 4, the dam safety program. The agency is requesting $490,000 all state general fund and 3 FTE positions for additional engineers and to increase existing employee salaries in the dam safety program. Similar to her other recommendations, the governor recommended $383,000 state general fund to fill vacant engineer positions, but did not recommend $106,000 to increase salaries for current engineers in the dam safety program. Moving on to page 12. At the top of page 12, the agency is requesting $25,000 all state general fund for feral swine control contracts. This $25,000 was removed from the 2022 budget as part of the governor's reduced resources package. Again, reduced resources is when the governor requests that state agencies decrease their state general fund spending by 10%, and that was implemented in 22. For fiscal year '23, the agency is requesting to get $25,000 of those funds back for feral swine contracts, and the governor did concur with that request. And then the rest of the enhancements are state water plan fund enhancements. And I know the agency plans to discuss those in more detail, but quickly, the request number 6, the agency is requesting $450,000 from the state water plan fund for the water resources cost share, and the governor did concur with that request. On page 13, the agency is requesting $250,000 for conservation district aid, and the governor did concur with that. $100,000 for the buffer incentive program, and the governor did concur. Request number 9, the soil health program. This is a new program. The agency is requesting $103,000 for that program, and the governor did concur. Irrigation technology, and the governor did concur with that $100,000. On page 14, on page 14 at the top, the agency is requesting $250,000 from the state water plan fund for stream bank stabilization, and the governor did concur. And finally, $100,000 for the Conservation Reserve Enhancement Program, and the governor did concur with that request. Again, those last few were all state water plan fund, and the governor did recommend the full statutory transfers, so $6 million from the state general fund and $2 million from the Economic Development Initiatives Fund. And that's generally why all of those enhancements were concurred with by the governor. And Mr. Chairman, I will stand for questions on the Department of Agriculture's budget.
All right, thank you very much, Victoria. First, I'm going to back up on page 11. You talked about there that water appropriations for salary increase. The governor did not include that 40,000, but aren't they eligible for? Are these eligible for the 5% pay raise that the governor's doing? So they will get that. Okay.
If the legislature approves that 5%, then yes, all of these employees would qualify for that 5%.
Okay. Thank you. I'm going to just be sure.
Yeah.
Anybody else have any questions for Victoria? Senator Straub.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning, Victoria. Thank you for the great presentation. Under the state water plan, someone had brought it to my attention that there are payments that are going to be coming due in like 2028 to the Army Corps of Engineers. Can you explain those numbers with this budget?
So I'd be happy to talk a little bit about it if you would like, but that actually falls under the Water Office's budget that we'll hear next week. So if that's okay, we'll wait until next week, and I'll be sure that they talk about that.
That's perfect. Thank you.
Great.
Any other questions? Senator Peck.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On page 3, which you start on page 4, so I'm backing up to page 3. Notice the salaries and wages, actual 21 was 22.5. Then current fiscal year jumped to 24.5 in round numbers. That's $2 million increase. And then in 23, we're looking at another $1 million increase. Can you enlighten me as to why we're having such significant increases in salaries and wages?
Sure. So just generally speaking, 22 to 23 will be because of all of those enhancement requests. So even though the governor didn't recommend many salary increases for this agency, she did recommend adding quite a few new positions. So generally speaking, on pages, what was that? 10 and 11, you'll see the governor did recommend filling vacant positions in a couple of programs. So that's 22 to 23 generally. 21, let me look. Let me get back to you on 21 so that I don't hold up the presentation, but I will find out.
Mr. Chairman, if I may.
Go ahead, Mr.
On staying with page 3, the State General Fund, 9.4, and then down to 8.9, and then up to 10.3. That's SGF money. And can you help me understand that? And then I have one more question after that, Mr. Chairman, if possible.
Yeah, so from 22 to 23, again, all of those, similar to the salaries and wages, all of those were state general fund funded, state general fund funded. So the difference between 22 and 23 is filling those vacant positions because they're state general fund funded. And I forgot the second part of your question, or wasn't?
Well, I was just talking about the difference in the years from, on the state general fund.
Sure, and also, I'm sorry, I would also comment that on 21, between 21 and 22, there's a slight decrease. And that's mostly due to the reduced resources package that I just mentioned. So last year for 22, the governor requested that all agencies decrease their state general fund expenditures by 10%. So that explains the decrease from 21 to 22. And 22, not only is that reduced, 22 to 23, not only is that reduced resources package not there, they also have several state general fund enhancements.
And then my final question, Mr. Chairman, is on page 11, under the dam safety program positions. It looks like, if I'm reading this correctly, there was a request for $72,000 for new vehicles for the added positions. And then the governor does not recommend the added positions, but the vehicle purchases are still in there. Am I reading that correctly?
So thank you for the question. The governor recommended the funding for the vacant positions, but the agency requested to add 3 positions, so their FTE count would have gone up by 3. But what the governor requested is that the agency fill those positions using current vacant positions, so not increasing their FTE count. So the governor did recommend the funding for those positions. She just didn't want them to grow the number of FTE. So the vehicles are still needed because the funding for those positions is there.
So there's a significant addition or growing of government within the Department of Agriculture, it appears. That would be my interpretation. You don't have to answer that.
Thanks.
Mr. Chairman.
Any other questions, Member Victoria? While you're there, that line item, that 1.4 million, was that for the inspection, the new inspectors appropriation?
I'm sorry, could you tell me what page you're looking at?
1.4 million addition, on what page that was on there, what was that for?
Hold on.
Was that, I just don't even know if that's for the,
Sure, so I think you're looking at page 7 for those that are following along. And at the top of page 7, item number 1, SGF Enhancements does have 1.4 million, and yes, that is due to those various positions that they've requested.
the new inspector.
Yes.
Okay, just want to be sure.
Sure.
Any other questions for Victoria? Thank you very much. If we run across something later on, we might need you here again, so we'll go back to the secretary. You want to come forward? Any questions for the secretary? Senator Dahl.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Bean, it was my understanding during the pandemic that we had a large increase of mom and pop slaughterhouses type things, 1 or 2 steers a day type thing. Those are being inspected, correct? I mean, first of all, I guess, is that what I heard? Is that true?
They are. Depending on what type of plant, it makes a difference how much inspection they have.
Okay.
Those are custom only, aren't inspected as frequently.
If it's an individual, they don't fall under this, do they?
Oh, doing in their own processing? No. Yeah, the capacity, there was a huge call for capacity increases on the small plants. And fortunately, with the grants that we administered, there's about 8 to 10 million that went out to those small plants. A lot of it was to increase their capacity.
Could I follow up? Did you receive Spark money for any of this?
For,
Or the inspections and things for this?
not for inspections, the grant money that was utilized for the plants to add and increase their capacity, that was federal funds that come through that.
Any other questions? Senator Reichman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I kind of want to go on the same area where Senator Dahl was going. And meat, we went ahead and they built a new plant meat processing, and it's good meat. We enjoy it, and they're expanding. I think maybe 14 or so a week, or I don't know. But you mentioned there's quite a few that are coming across the state, okay, and you are expecting those. And I wonder if you could just tell, I think I know the answer, but I'd like to hear from you. Why is there such a demand for these facilities across the state? Thank you.
I think there's several factors in play. One, when the pandemic hit and people were having difficulty getting meat on the shelves there for a few weeks, they were realizing that maybe we can get this locally, and so they were called upon the local plants to try to fulfill their needs. There's also a pretty considerable increase in demand by the livestock owners for an outlet for those for their animals, and some have decided to try to sell direct to consumers. So it seems to be easier to partner with a plant who has the expertise, equipment, and the inspection that would be necessary for you to resell it. So there was some of that demand driving it as well.
Senator Francisco.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Secretary, for being here. I am very pleased to see the enhancements, especially through the State Water Plan and the new Soil Health Initiative. I know that understanding value of cover crops and things is going to be really helpful. I'm pleased to see your request for support for the inspectors for small meat processors. I know how important that is as well to some of our areas. I want to support the new initiative for the animal health. But I'm wondering, is there anything that we're doing for local food systems, local food coordination in this budget?
Well, I would say in our ag marketing budget would be where the emphasis there is. So we do work with farmers markets, in training and education, and help coordinate what touch points they're going to have with other agencies. We're administering 2 specialty crop block grant programs this year, an extra one that came available and I can get the dollars, but we're administering those, and that'll be going out to probably 12, I think, people the first round, and they're still looking at applications for the next round. There's our organic cost share program. There's some other, trainings available. Our From the Land to Kansas program, we fund some efforts at Kansas State University in the food science department. So if some startup company has a special food product, a lot of times they just need that extra help in the analysis of what it is, maybe a tweak in the recipe, and help with the label. So we are ongoing working with a certain number of those every year. So, and if there's other concepts and ideas, I'm sure welcome to entertain those. I might also add there's a new USDA federal grant on local food distribution program, and we're in the process of having conversations with the food distribution systems to see if we can't partner and access those grants as well. And they would be purchasing from local producers.
Senator Straub.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sorry to keep harping on this issue, but back to the meat and poultry inspectors. How many inspectors do we currently have?
I'd have to ask. We can get that number pretty quick, I think. I know we have several vacancies right now as well. That's probably the most difficult program to keep people in place. But, and they're, like I said, they're stationed or work from their home. Most of them work from their homes across the state, depending on where the needs are at. We'll try to put more inspectors in those areas. But they have to, on some of those plants that have a day of processing, we have to be there. And we've had illnesses, people retiring, people moving on, and so juggling those people around to make sure that they don't slow the work, scheduled work that the plant has is sometimes challenging. Did you find it? 37.5 authorized. That's total FTEs. Yeah, 37.5 authorized FTEs in the whole program. We can break that out. Most of them are in the field, but we have, I think, 2 that work in the office and 2 that work some regional administrative duties. But I can get you a breakdown on that if you like. And also where we would probably put those additional 6 if we had the funding.
Okay, I would appreciate that. Having been on a meats judging team or carcass selection team at the community college years ago, I can appreciate the inspector's job, but I'm also very leery of giving more federal overregulation in our facilities. I think it's great that we have an increase in meat processing facilities. And so that would be my second question is, how many processing facilities do we currently have in the state, and at what different levels of processing?
We actually produced a map for the House side on that shows those locations and the type, and we'll get that to you as well.
Perfect, thank you.
Committee, thank you very much, Mr. Secretary. We have several more live presentations. We have a whole bunch of virtual. We want to get to as many of those as we can and maybe get some questions, so we'll hold our questions till at the end. Thank you, Mr. Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And our next presenter would be Kellen Liebisch, the Chief Fiscal Officer. Welcome to the committee.
Thank you. Good morning, Chairman Kirshen and members of the committee. I'm going to give the very abbreviated version of this due to time. So before you should have roughly a 30-page document that at the front page it says Kansas Department of Agriculture Budget Overview for 2022. And this will include all of our analysis for the adjusted 22 and the 23 budget year. And if you will turn with me to page 1, I'm just going to give a couple high-level overview points since Secretary Beam did a very nice job, as well as Victoria, on giving the overview. I will reiterate the fact that we do have 332 authorized positions. Those are not necessarily filled positions as of today's date, but those are the total of authorized positions in our agency. You'll also see the budget for our 15 programs and the program expenditures, which Secretary Beam did a very nice job of going over. If you will turn with me to page 3 for the agricultural laboratory, I'm just going to point out a couple of programs here to more clearly delineate some of the enhancements that Secretary Beam pointed out to hopefully tie some of those back in, because you've been asking some questions about some of the enhancements, and maybe I can point some of those out here. This isn't necessarily an enhancement, but if you look under the program expenditures, under the rent category for the agricultural laboratory on the bottom of page 3, you will see how the rent in fiscal year 19 was about $320,000, then decreased, went to almost 0, and then went back up. As Secretary Beam pointed out, our lab did change locations, and so that's why you'll see that change in expenditure there for the agricultural laboratory. Turning to the back of page 3 to page 4, when KDA does our budget, we actually utilize, as part of the performance-based budget, we utilize a decision-based budget process in which we craft all of our programs into sub-programs, and we delineate the amount of budget to each of those sub-programs. So I'm just pointing out that for all 15 programs, you can break down those programs into a little bit further granularity and see the amount of budget that goes to each of those sub-programs. So going through these pages, I'm just pointing that out, that's on the back of each of the pages if you wish to go into that further detail. The next page that I would ask you to turn to would be page 7, which is animal health. Secretary Beam did speak about, we have a governor's budget enhancement for the Animal Facilities Inspection Program for fiscal year 23. That would be seen under the program expenditures, and it's borne in multiple categories for salary, fees, other services, and other operating expenditures. But that's why we have an increase in that program for fiscal year 23 because of that enhancement in that program. If you turn over to the back on page 8, I will also note that for all of our regulatory programs, we have provided fee information. So we have provided the approximate dollar amount per unit for a license or something of that nature. And then we've taken the revenue for each of those fee categories and tried to give you the total amount of those actual units. And so in the essence of time, the last program I'm going to go over today here is conservation. And conservation will be on page 9. So if you'll just flip the page with me to conservation. Victoria and Secretary Beam provided quite a bit of information on our state water plan funding. We did have some carryover funding from fiscal year 21 into 22 for that state water plan funding. So that's why you will see an increase in that program budget. We also were, as part of the governor's budget recommendation, we do have money in there for enhancement requests in 23 in various categories for conservation. So that is included there in a bevy of categories, which if you turn back to the analysis that Victoria provided goes through all of those different categories. So at this time, I would ask you, I think Secretary Beam said, I do have a technical amendment that I would like to request. You should also have some written testimony from me. It's on the Kansas Department of Agriculture letterhead. And to summarize that, when we were doing our budget submission, we work very closely with the Water Office and the Water Authority to try and craft a budget submission that is in the best interest of all stakeholders and all Kansans. Before we even did our base budget submission, the Department of Agriculture actually moved a small amount of funds, roughly $298,044, from 2 funds, stream bank stabilization and soil health, into 7 other funds, so that we were using some of those funds in some other funds that could utilize that money. Unfortunately, there was a miscommunication between myself and our budget analyst. I take full responsibility for that, and I apologize. However, I feel that the most transparent thing to do is to stand before you and ask for a technical correction so that our budget is correct in the actual bill, to have that money moved into the correct fund and budget unit for next year. So what I am requesting is a technical correction as part of an amendment to move $298,044 from stream bank stabilization and soil health to the 7 fund and budget units listed above. And you can see them there. They're from interstate water issues to riparian and wetland. The bottom line does not change any funds. It does not change what we intend to do with it. The Water Authority accepted it that way, and it was simply a technical correction and oversight on my part in communicating that with the division of the budget. So I would request that from you when you work the budget, and I'm happy to stand for any questions on any of our budget items or on the technical correction at the appropriate time.
Very much, Kelly. We're not going to take questions right now. We'll see how we proceed in getting these other presentations in here. So we'll come back to that, and we'll fix that amendment too for you. Next, we'd like to call on Randy Stuckey from Kansas Feed and Grain. Welcome to the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Randy Stuckey, General Counsel for the Kansas Grain and Feed Association. You should have before you a joint written testimony between our association and the Kansas Cooperative Council. We want to present an issue to you that wouldn't be new to you. It's a rehash of something we presented last year in consultation or in reference to Senate Bill 143, which was a request by the agency for additional authority to increase fees on the grain industry in Kansas up to an additional $120,000, give or take. And last year, that bill was passed. They got the additional authority for that fee increase. At the same time, we asked for $60,000 to cut that fee increase in half. So 60,000 by the industry and 60,000 SGF. We thought that was appropriate because the program itself, while it does benefit the industry, also benefits farmers. It allows for transparency and oversight for the grain industry in Kansas. This is the Grain Warehouse Inspection Program. And unfortunately, for 2023, the enhancement was not included for $60,000. So we would respectfully request when we go to work the budget that it would be an enhancement of the not just 1.3, but 1.3 and $60,000 for the Grain Warehouse Inspection Program. There is the agency does have a regulation that's being promulgated currently, and it's two regulations. One would be for 2022 to increase fees by $60,000 because they did get the enhancement last year. The next regulation would be for an increase of $120,000 on industry if they don't get the enhancement. So we would just ask that you allow for the enhancement and allow the agency to not promulgate that additional regulation for the full amount. Certainly would stand for questions at the appropriate time, and thank you for your time.
We'll forego the questions until we have time at the end here. Thank you very much, Randy. Committee, turn your attention to, we have virtual presentations next. The first one would be Jasmine Kyle, Southeast Kansas Humane Society. Are you on a WebEx so we can hear you?
Yes, sir, I am. Yes, sir.
Okay, there you go. You're in good shape now. Welcome to the committee.
Hi, good morning, everybody. My name is Jasmine Kyle, and I am the director of the Southeast Kansas Humane Society, located in Pittsburgh, Kansas, in Crawford County. We are a local not-for-profit animal shelter. We're also a no-kill animal shelter licensed under the Kansas Pet Animal Act. I'm speaking on behalf of our organization and a coalition of animal welfare supporters in Southeast Kansas who support a standalone division of the Animal Facility Inspection Program, along with the additional funding needed to operate the program effectively. The Pet Animal Act was put in place in 1989, and under that agency to alleviate the standards and care of pet animals in Kansas. During the last 10 years of the KAHD, they averaged seizing 950 animals and closing 20 to 45 licensed and unlicensed facilities every year. In comparison, the current AFI program sold said equipment that would have enabled seizures of animals in need of care and have only had 2 seizures in 10 years. The legislative post-audit that was completed in 2018 found that the cycle of inspection failures were allowed to continue without consequences, and that animals were left to suffer, and there was no longer an investigator position to find unlicensed facilities. I urge this committee to approve the money needed for an effective AFI program and to move the AFI into its own division. The Southeast Kansas Humane Society, we personally assisted the Department of Agriculture in May of last year with a large seizure order of Chihuahuas, and the conditions were disgusting and horrible. It took them over a month, these dogs, to realize that a blanket was not going to hurt them. If you've ever heard a dog scream when they touched grass, they had no idea what it was. Again, from our own organization, from our coalition of animal supporters in the Southeast Kansas area, we encourage that the standalone division and the monetary needed get approved by this committee. Thank you all for your time today.
All right, thank you, Jasmine, very much. And we'll take some questions at the end. If we have one more presentation, then we can have questions. Next up, committee, is Brandon Sokol, Animal Control Officer, man. He's not here now. Oh, he bailed out already? What is he afraid of? Okay, committee, our next presenter on WebEx left, so he will forego that. So we can move into questions now. That was the last of the presentations. Referred to in your packet there, the written testimony, there's 5 of those should be in there on various topics too. So most of this, I guess, is the pet animal stuff. So that is their written presentations. So at this time, we'll take some questions. If anybody has any special questions, we have a little bit of time. So over any of the topics we covered. So I'm fortunate we got through them all. Everybody got to be heard. So no questions? Oh, Senator Francisco. Sorry about that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'm not sure if this should be a representative of the agency or Victoria, because I'm looking on the Kansas Department of Agriculture budget overview, page 15, that talks about additional funding for the grain warehouse in the governor's budget recommendation. So I'm wondering if I can understand that increase along with the request for the additional 60,000. So this is, Victoria, it's on page 15 of there.
Senator Francisco, so if I'm understanding your question correctly, you're looking at page 15 of our budget document. So the additional money in the fiscal year 23 budget governor's recommendation on our budget table actually is us. We are trying to take that additional grain inspector online, so it's showing those additional expenses. But that is not tied to the $60,000 enhancement or the $60,000 request that Mr. Stuckey asked for today. That's us trying to fully staff that program.
Any other questions? Senator Dahl.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't know who addresses this. It goes to the pet animal. Any volunteers?
I'm good at deflecting if I have to.
Thank you, Secretary.
No, well, I'll try to answer your question.
I was reading through the written testimony.
Okay.
And in Sumner County, there was a gentleman, I believe, maybe a lady, that talked about an inspection like in, is it true that only to pass an inspection, only 33 of the pens have to have water and such, have to be okay for them to pass a pet inspection?
Well, there is specific criteria on the watering, and I'd have to go back and look, but no, that it would apply to every animal. And either has to be available all the time or they have to have a program that they water them so many times a day.
It's just, it was talking, it was awful, actually. It was sad, but okay, that was my question. But it said that only 33% of the pens, they had the dog runs there,
Okay.
have to be okay. I guess 67% don't have to be okay.
No, I think that's misinterpretation. Yes.
So, okay.
Yes.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Senator Fagg.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This might be for Secretary Bean, too. I was on this Animal Facilities Inspection Program. What's been going on up to this point? Has that just been not being addressed like it should? Why do we have to do a separate program?
Well, I remember when the program was first implemented in the 80s, and I've watched it through the years, and I would say in most cases it was understaffed to the degree of expectations of people as far as frequency of inspection, finding those that need to be inspection. So it's always been under a lot of scrutiny. There's a lot of stakeholders that watch that carefully and are quick to point out if they think we're missing the boat, and we receive a lot of complaints from the public, and so a lot of our inspections are in fact to check on complaints to see if people who are licensed are adhering to the regulations, or if they're not licensed, if they should be or not. So one of the conferees I know noted the last legislative post-audit report that came out in December of 2018 was fairly critical of the program, mostly procedures, the follow-ups and policies in place for inspectors. And so that's one of the things we've addressed in the last couple of years. And the last post-audit look at this confirmed that we had met those obligations. But to do it justice, to keep, right now we have 2 inspectors doing all the state. We're interviewing, hopefully have a 3rd one in place. It's hard to keep those positions. We could use, if we had that other inspector, a 4th one, we could do some of those potential problem ones more often. With the attorney, we have a lot of follow-ups through the process if they fail an inspection, just keeping that at the forefront. So this enhancement, we believe, will really beef up the program and allow us to be more responsive to this sector. It's a whole separate topic on division, and I think you'll see a bill. I think you might have even introduced the bill, Mr. Chairman, in this committee. So we'll have, if you have a hearing on it, we'll have a discussion, but I think it merits creation of a separate division, which we would support at the time. But right now, the budget is the money for the program.
Senator Fagg.
Does KDA have attorneys?
We do.
Why do we have to hire another attorney?
It's our belief that with water and all the programs that we have, that we aren't able to keep a lot of these at the forefront. And when you have a situation with an animal facility, it's not something you could wait a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks like some other legal aspects. So we want to devote someone that's strictly on that program and not burden the other attorneys.
Any other questions, committee? Seeing none, thank you, Mr. Secretary.
Thank you.
That's our last, through with our proponents. And we have the written testimony, so tomorrow we will be working on the KDH&E, our portion of that budget. And then we will have the recommendation period next week for this one, isn't it?
Thursday.
Thursday, okay. Let's keep that in mind. So Thursday's the recommendation for the Department of Agriculture budget. With that, committee, thank you for your patience, and we are adjourned.